Okay, so this is it's kind of wild. This is the last section of chapter 11 before we get into chapter 12, and we're really like nearing the bend for this transition. Actually, like we're at the bend for this transition where we've taken the ascending pathway, where we've reconciled through all of these facets of the development of our nervous system, through our sense of physical safety, through our sense of kind of like feeling. Um, that yeah, goes in a bunch of different directions: emotion, feeling, desire, pleasure, um, resonance, like being able to the words escaping me right now, into power, into connection, up. And so what we're doing now is like this is actually folds right into where we're going, which is talking about conscious creation. And so this long form journal prompt, this is if you're following along in the book, it's page 286. And this is the inquiry. And, it's interesting having read yesterday the dreams and the kind of like, honestly, like what I now read is like the receptivity component to this facet of this practice, which like doing it in the descending order, where we start in the expansive seventh hub with questions and inquiry and conscious reclamation. And then we're moving things and densifying them into realities through a series of very like practical applied exercises. We start from like the inspiration, the aspect of like getting to a place where we have the idea and we have the direct, like we have the notion of what we want to do. A lot of, it's really common that people feel like, well, I don't know what it is that I want to do. I have this feeling that there's something I'm supposed to do. I have this, like, I want to know what my purpose is. I want to connect with, like, it's like I have all these kind of feelings of like unrest in me that are kind of just sort of bubbling beneath the surface, and kind of a sense of like that there's greater potential, the sense that your life has a meaning that you can't put your finger on. And in the seventh hub and the practices we do here, we are directly I'm just checking for the microphone. We're directly getting to that aspect of like the kind of why or what, or like the inquiry part, which is the block to knowing these things is, like, what is your purpose? What are you supposed to do next? What's the right move? What's the meaning of life? Kind of stuff. And just anything, and like honestly, anything. Like it's like inquiry large and small of like being stuck is this stuckness comes from actually, whether this is consciously realized or not, is a belief that it's a limiting belief. It's a belief that you already know the answer and you just don't want to do it, or that there's something about you that can't do it. Like, that what needs to be done and you cannot do that. It's beneath your power, it's beneath your talent, it's beneath whatever. And so, I mean, one thing I'm just going to seed in here is that if you are called to something, if something feels like it needs resolution, if it needs to be understood, and the path to it is blocked by any sense of doubt or disbelief in yourself or low self-worth, um, that action is not the right action. Like, so that is not the right action for you. And, there's, yeah, I'm just going to put it that way. That's not the action. And the idea that there's like one way to do things, um, or at least sort of like one general methodology that has a lot of different ways. I mean, I would say cardio is a really good example of this. Where when people are, trying to get fit, or like if they want to, for some people, this is kind of like a very understandable trigger for people, but like things like weight loss and the idea that's like, well, I just don't want to run, I just don't want to do cardio, I just don't want this, I don't want to do that. When cardio actually isn't good for weight loss. Like, I mean, I'm using this as an example reluctantly because I think it's because, the subject matter is just so loaded. And I really am deeply appreciative of that, for many reasons. But the thing is that it's like getting stuck. So here's the thing, is like getting stuck at being like, well, I don't want to do the thing that gets me to where I want to go. So it's just being like at a sort of a gridlock. Whereas the thing is, like what the thing that we're talking about here is letting go of that idea that's like, you know what? If it doesn't work, I don't know the answer. The answer for how to do the thing I want to do actually works. It's fun. It resonates with the way that I work. It resonates with the way that you work. It resonates with something that is, really like the hard work that feels satisfying. Because here's the thing, it's like, oh, I can hear even in myself the reluctance, like the echoing of my, what I call previous programming about that, which is like, yeah, well, that's just low work ethic. I'm incredibly a high work ethic person. It's actually like the thing that defines me to people is how hard and if you put something in front of me, how hard I'll work with it. And the thing is the issue of burnout is not being able to sustain something. So the idea of grinding, and this is addressed earlier in the book, but let's call it back. The idea of grinding and grinding and grinding without the lubrication of fun just actually burns out an engine. So sustaining something, and I really can see this resonating with a lot of people, which is like this thing about burnout being like, some kind of thing like I wasn't tough enough, I didn't have what it takes. And this might be not even that comforting to people, but it's like, yeah, well, because the way it was being done, either the entire thing that was being done was the wrong thing, or the way it was being done was just out of alignment. And I mean, look, as a talking into the void kind of thing, this is something I'd love to be having a conversation live with because there's so many objections that come up with this. And it's so deep in our programming. It's so deep. The belief of like kind of this work ethic thing. That like the hardness of the work, the unbearableness of it contains some, like part of its virtue. I mean, honestly, it's like how far down the rabbit hole do you really want to go here? Because it is like the amount of untruth in terms of what it takes to create and build things and do things. The ideas that we have, we have we're given the wrong playbook, or we're given like a doctored playbook. And then when we can't do it, we're like, "Oh, I'm just not a creator. I'm not a doer. I'm not a builder." And it's like everyone is a creator. It's just part of human nature. You are a creator. And the separation from this integrity, this important part of your integrity, this like fundamental aspect of your integrity keeps us doing things that serve other interests. Because it's like, well, what's the point? I need to just survive. I need to pay my bills. I need to this. I need to that. And then we're disconnected from our power. And our power, our labor. One of the things right now, I think one of the things with AI is that it's like there's a bit of that narrative of people being like, "Oh my gosh, all of a sudden I'm not gonna be worth like, have any worth in the labor market." I mean, these narratives, like always, they've always been happening. They've always been happening. They're just not true. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. The whole other topic. The amount of power you have. Even if it's like a soft power, if it's not like the notion of being really domineering or powerful in a conventional sense, the power of the potency of what you can create, how you can love, how you can express things, how you can feel, how you can enjoy. Like everything in terms of the power, like your ability, like your superpowers, like these are all things like we fit together. None of us is this like sort of perfect, Parinama stack, hub on top of hub. And this is where, it's kind of spoiler alert, we're very individual in this, but what we're ultimately doing is taking an inventory of what we are, not necessarily coming from a place of trying to solve shame and fear through connection, but connecting through our inherent wholeness to really elevate and optimize and evolve to the continuation of our evolution. That's what we're doing. So let's talk about this journal prompt. Let's talk about inquiry, and I already talked a bit about framing inquiry. So let's see, I'm going to read it. And then if there's anything else that comes up, we're going to just like rock that out. Okay, here we go. So again, this is page 286. I'm here in this fair book here. And look, you can see we're at the end of chapter 11, about to go to chapter 12. We are going to finish this year. So it took a year. So seventh hub inquiries are not questions that have immediate answers. Seventh hub inquiries are not questions that have immediate answers. Instead, there's grace and effortlessness, and the only work required is forming the questions and being receptive to the answers when they arrive. Instead of inquiring with respect to things you feel certain about, try venturing into the areas of your life where you feel the mystery. That is, be open to new ideas in places of certainty. And this is another thing where I want to point out, like the holding pattern, the shadow of this hub is certainty. And part of the blocking capacity of certainty is like what, as talked about just now, is that it keeps us from seeing new options. Like the certainty that we know how something is the antithesis of expansion. So I'll reread, instead of inquiring with respect to things you feel certain about, try venturing into the areas of your life where you feel the mystery. That is, be open to new ideas in places of certainty. And the other point I would make about that is speaking from my own experience, specifically with the sort of the manifestation of Parinama method, is it's really uncomfortable for me to be in this like super expansive state of inquiry. And I will say that when I entered it as sort of a, just kind of like wandered into this place, forced into it actually, but that's a whole other story. It was really uncomfortable for me because it has no answers. Like it's a place of space. And there's no doing. It's the opposite of density. It's just being. It was incredibly uncomfortable for me. And so much to the point that I did things where I'd, like, work in companies that would ask me to do consulting gigs, and I would do them. I'd pick like, the things I'd choose to do would be things I felt aligned with. So they weren't necessarily the best paying things, but they, like, did this thing where I could, like, actually be doing the kinds of things that, like, validated this kind of very, like, I don't know, dense, like, the more sort of established part of myself versus being in this space of being like, "Well, what is it?" I mean, it's really fucking uncomfortable to just stare out into the void with your life. So even when the familiar is dog shit, it's kinda like, "Well, listen," terrible term. It's just, like, even when it's, like, mundane or it's, like, it's dragging you, it's still, like, it still feels like feet on the ground, and so this thing about being like, "Well, I'm just gonna float around like a astronaut that got cut off from the spaceship," it's like it created a lot of anxiety. So what's my point? My point is that this practice, as it is outlined, is the reason that we go from the bottom up instead of starting with conscious creation and even emphasizing that. Because quite frankly, the conscious creation, me as like sort of the author of this, it's where I have a lot more like practical experience. It's funny because it's like the smallest part of the book, but it's actually like where like whatever credential I would have kind of arises from in terms of like generating wealth and building things and doing a lot of stuff throughout my life. But this creation, this order of operations where we're really establishing practices that ground us help. And it, like, absolutely to a point where I could, like, really riff on this, make it possible to actually embody while being in a state of sort of this inquiry which has no certainty in it. So, it's like the I didn't have the embodiment practice, so it felt really scary. And so I'd cling to ideas that had to, in my first issues would, like, flare up. So all of a sudden, so one of the things you find is when people are like moving into this kind of like purpose inquiry space, a lot of times we're like, yeah, how do I pay my bills? And granted that there's a practicality to that. I'm not naive to that, but it's like very in this kind of zone of panic versus like, I'll find a way. I'm pretty talented. I'll find a way. I'll figure this out. So the grounding of this, of starting in the first hub to be able to feel the physical trust and actually embody that plays a really important role when we're going to get, and it gives the tool set for this practice. So, okay. Ask the question. So here's the exercise. So ask the question, write it down, and allow for the time required for the answer to arrive. Sometimes it takes a little while, so you may need to have patience. Below are 4 prompts to help get the inquiry juices flowing. I'm going to tell you, sometimes this takes a long time. Could take a year, could take a month, could take a week, could take a night. Part of this, and we'll get into this in the next chapter, is really how receptive. And once again, this really goes back. Like one of the things with inquiry is how willing are you to hear this? What level of desperation do you have to be chopped down to? And what aspect? Because surrender, as a sort of like religious and spiritual notion, is when you've dropped the whole project of certainty. Like surrender is a forcing function of dissolving certainty, from the absolute brutal, in the brutal way of doing it, which is like forcing the illusion to crumble. And it's like, oh, this doesn't work. This thing I'm so invested in and so committed to doesn't work. So now I'm on my knees asking God for help. And God will deliver. God, yeah. But but back to this is like the time it takes to receive. So when we're asking for it to come to us is very much related to how much resistance we have to what the answer is. Because spoiler alert, a lot of times it's absolutely not what we want to hear. And I've told this before, and I'll say it here again, is that I ask the question, how do I serve you? How do I best serve you? How do I best serve you? After my morning practice, I would meditate every day. And I would ask, how do I serve you? How do I serve you? And in my case, unfortunately, the answer came with you have to surrender everything you're attached to. And I immediately knew what that meant. And I was like, oh my God, no. I did, but I also knew that the tension that was building in me, because once again, my certainty was that, my partner, my very specific yoga practice, and even my wealth, which actually hasn't been affected so much, interestingly enough. That I had to just be willing to accept that those things would go away. And 2 of them fell away and were, incredibly important. But the thing was, as Parinama came forward in greater, clarity, those things, those 2, really deep attachments had been really part of what I believed made my life great. Like, really gave me this satisfaction. It's like, this life is great, except there was just this, like, pervasive angst that it wasn't. It's like, well, I have it all. On a certain level, I was like, I'm happy with this. This is great. But I was like, yeah, but there's just something that just kind of is squeezing my insides. It's like, it just sort of you know, won't quit. So, yeah. So when those things, but they also played a really important role in this because their existence and then their absence provided a lot of revelation. It was very helpful for my own liberation. It was tremendous amounts of gratitude. So here we go. Okay, so below are 4 prompts to help get the juices flowing. So number 1 is, if you could snap your fingers and get the definitive answer to one question, which one would it be? So here's the thing, actually, this just reminds me, is we're not trying to figure out answers. We're like, what are my questions? It's really like, what's the question? Because another thing I'll tie in here, I've talked about before, is that a lot of times we spend a lot of time in like what we don't recognize, but as the answer is like, this is impossible. This is so hard. Why does this have to be so hard? That's not really an inquiry question, by the way. That's an answer. It's like, why does this have to be so hard actually means that this is so hard. And I'm a victim of it versus being like, is there another way to do this that's easier? That's an inquiry. Why does this have to be so hard? Is like not a thing. It's a thing, but it's not. So the fact that something's asked as a question certainly doesn't make it inquiry. But it's really like, this is something that really like requires like a leap of faith here, which is that in this space, it's absolutely about letting go of knowing what the answer is. And this is really hard. And realizing like how much we think we know how stuff works. We're like, I know how this works. I know how this works. Whatever. I mean, this goes back to the Parinama Tangle, which is like our early events and circumstances. They create these reflexes. We create these rationalizations, which is like, this is what, like for like, this is who I am, or blah, 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 and then that creates reality. Like this creation of being like, I know what this is like, this is like kind of the ultimate cage in this, which is believing that it's like, no, I know all the answers and life's just really limited. Like, it's just like we're in this kind of constricted space about what's possible. And for me, this is all that's actually available. And I can say with absolute certainty, oh my God, strong idea, loosely held certainty is that that's absolutely not it. It is absolutely not it. But it's hard to be in it because it's like it creates like this sense of comfort, to be like, yeah, this is just kind of, I know how things work. I'm doing the best I can kind of thing, you know? And it's like doing the best we can in like in structures that like really, yeah. Okay, next. So the first one is, if you could snap your fingers and get the definitive answer to one question, which one would it be? It's one question. It's one question. You would know for certain. Snap your fingers, you know the answer. It is provided for you. The way is made. It is everything is like all obstacles are removed from you seeing the truth. Yeah. I can even feel like that kind of like, ooh. It really is. Oh my God. Okay, witch cackle. Okay, 2. What is something you've always wondered about? How would you phrase it as a question? What is something that you've always wondered about? And can be anything. It's like, how do people make beads? Why was my, grandfather despondent? And the thing is, like, what you're looking for is like this kind of juice in the question. It's like, yeah, how is it? Like, where there really is like a sense of like, I can't Google out like what is that? And maybe you don't have one, so no big deal. If you don't, let that one go. So number 3 is, what's the strangest question you could ever ask? What's the strangest question you could ever ask? And last but not least is there something you often think about but don't share with other people? How would you phrase it as a question? So I'm going to go back. Number 4 really points to this notion of the fact that the answers don't come because we don't want them. We are in an abundance of the answers for these questions, but going back to this tangle and this whole practice that we've been in, when we are locked in with fear of our physical survival, guilt, shame, trapped anger that we're like nervous about, it's like, what's going to happen if that, like, if I speak out and say what's really on my mind, that's going to, once again, put me in danger, isolate me, affect my safety. It's just, the part of this is to unlock your life involves there like a definite alleviation and release of the fear of our physical survival. And it feels very real. I get it. It has many layers. The thing has been painted over and resurfaced and redone. It's a mile thick of different layers of programming, like where the fear comes from. But back to the question, is there something you often think about but don't share with other people? How would you phrase it as a question? This could be like, why doesn't this make me happy? I have everything. Why am I not happy? What would make me happy? What is it that would make me happy? What would bring joy? Like, what is happiness? Like, what is it? Would it mean to be happy? To be fulfilled, to feel joy, to have more feeling in my life? Going to be laughing more? Going to be present more? Ask. Ask. And by the way, it's like, so it's weird. It's disruptive in a very short term way. And ultimately, it is about realigning into integrity, which is, it's disruptive, but it's like great. Okay, the exercises in this chapter are a continuation of the actualization process that's been explored throughout the Parinama method. So, this is the outro in the chapter. Grounding ourselves physically so we can transcend to feel more fully alive. In the next chapter, we find an idea and turn it into a physical reality using the awareness of all the hubs. We use the reverse order of actualization, starting at the top with the expansive space of the seventh hub to catch inspiration and draw it down through the hubs all the way to the grounding of the first hub. Yeah. Yeah, it's like so much is possible. And in moments of hopelessness or feeling bound by fear, it feels very real and it just blocks out this integrity of who and what we truly are. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore it together if you come along for the ride. Okay, so next time, oh my gosh, this is really exciting. There's only 2 chapters left, and the third chapter is kind of its own thing. I mean, the third chapter of part 3, chapter 13. Okay, lucky 13. Okay, so that's it for today. Any questions or comments, I will answer. Yeah, and you can write me questions at the Parinama Instagram if you don't want to put them in a public chat forum, and I get to them. I try to get to them relatively quickly. I have more than I used to, so it's kind of, it's a little, but it matters to me to the extent that I can connect with people, and a lot of people I get stuff just from the book, not necessarily from these videos. Or, whatever. So, what was I going to say? Yeah, one thing I will say is that, like, if the questions are like, so some of the notes I want to make on that are, I'm not going to make it here. Actually, it could make sense in terms of inquiry. Um, a lot. So, like, one thing I'll note is that there's kind of an interesting thing where a third hub adaptation that involves, like, kind of a lot, like, really protecting against vulnerability leads to, like, I see this lead to like, some questions being asked as kind of like like a positioning from a state of authority. It's like, well, I've already done this. So, and that's a real third hub thing. And it's very common, actually, which I'm finding interesting. It's really common. And it's really, like, look, it's just a thing. Okay. So, anyway, that's it for today. Yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Talk to you later. Bye.